Welcome to Seek, Go, Create. We redefine success in leadership, business, and ministry. We're sharing topics, stories, and conversations that allow us to rethink how we live, work, and lead. This is your host, Tim Winders. I'm a performance coach and author who specializes in helping executive teams and entrepreneurial leaders maximize their potential. We want to hear from you. If you're listening in, we want to hear from you. Go to seekgocreate.com and give us your best email address so that we can connect and learn from each other. Plus, we'll make sure you never miss an episode, and we are always giving away bonuses, extras, and we're about to be giving away merchandise. So go there, give us your email address, and we will look forward to connecting with you there. Today, we have Quan Huynh as our guest, and let me give you this bio. Quan spent 22 years of his life behind bars. The amazing thing is if you look at him, if you're watching this on video, if you're listening, you can't tell this, he looks like he's barely 22 years old. So that's what's amazing about it. But anyway, in 1999, he shot and killed another man in a gang-related incident in Hollywood, California. As he served a life sentence, he found his freedom from within. He wishes to share that freedom with others. We're going to dig deep into that story, where he's been, where he's at now, all that's going on. Quan, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you. My first question is usually something about an elevator pitch or what, if someone asks you what you do, and I want to get to that. But there's a statement that I read in your book. We're going to talk more about it later. But it says, I was not born a murderer. Can you expand on that and maybe talk about, at one point it might have been your identity. Now I don't believe it is. Let's start with that instead of your elevator pitch. We'll get to that later. So I was not born a murderer. Respond to that.
Yeah, it was during my life sentence when the light started to come on, is when I realized, um, I was just asking myself these questions. How did I get here? And one book in particular at the time was C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And there was this passage that really resonated with me about the choices we make can either turn us into a heavenly creature or a hellish creature. And it just stuck with me. And I ended up carrying that quote with me everywhere. But then it was just a reminder that I was not born a murderer. That I took a long series of choices down the wrong path and continued series of wrong choices, which ultimately culminated in me thinking it was okay to shoot and kill another living, breathing human being. But on the flip side of that, once I realized that, then I realized I could also transform my inner world by making intentional, correct choices from then on out for the rest of my life. And that's basically what I tried to apply. And that is how I found my just total sense of liberation and freedom years before they paroled me from my life sentence.
Wow. In podcast land, we usually a lot of people will take some clip from the middle of the podcast and put it at the beginning to kind of grab people. I just want to say this to you and the listener. If what you said doesn't grab the listener and draw them into what we're about to discuss, then I think they kind of need to do a quick checkup, because there was so much power in what you said. All right. I want to kind of leave that there. I do want to mention that at the time of recording this, you just had a book that was released, Sparrow in the Razor Wire, and the subtitle is Finding Freedom from Within While Serving a Life Sentence. And I want to let you know I got that book about 24 hours ago when it was released, and I'm 2/3 of the way through, and I'm really annoyed that I couldn't finish it before we talked. But man, it was just, I kept being drawn in because I know that there's a deeper story that it's going into. Give us just a brief glimpse into the book, but I want to go into it more later. So just give us a quick overview because I got a lot of questions. I want to back up and kind of talk about how you came to where you were in prison and all those choices you just talked about. But tell us briefly about the book, but we're going to come back to it later.
Sure. The book is written for men that are doing long or life-term sentences, and in it, I'm just sharing with them uh, how did I, basically turn into a hellish creature, but then how did I come to a point in my life where I wanted to become, as C.S. Lewis says, like a heavenly creature. So um, I wrote it in a way where I know most men in there, when we started doing groups, I noticed most men felt more, my message resonated with them more when I'm sharing of my own vulnerability and my own challenges. And that's the way I wrote the book. I didn't write it from a place like, oh, I'm home now. This is what you need to do to get here. It was not like that. It's just more like, this is where I continue to mess up. And this is where I started to find my way back out.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about arrogance and cockiness and all, but to me, the book is just dripping with humility.
Mm.
And you mentioned, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and ask a little bit more of a deeper question before we get into some other things. You mentioned that the audience for the book is probably people that are currently incarcerated. All right, I'm a business guy, entrepreneur business guy, have done this for 30 plus years. I coach and work with a lot of them. To me, don't you think that there's a lot of lessons for people? Well, to some degree, a lot of people are incarcerated even though they're not behind bars. So who else can benefit from
Yeah,
this?
it's I'm glad that you actually even brought that up because I know like some of my preliminary feedback for the book were people like that I've read it and they said, Quan, this book is much more than just for people that are incarcerated. There's so much that you have me challenging in myself. But I thought, okay, the bias, this is a friend, this is someone that knows me, this is a colleague. But then like these past couple of days, just since the book's been released and people have been reading. Like I had a friend call me last night and she was just crying on the phone. She listened to the whole Audible all the way to the wee hours of the morning and then just called me last night. And like I know when I wrote it, I go, then when I can take a step back, I go, you know what, there are some universal truths that I uncovered in my own journey in writing it. And those were basically the ones I wanted to share with the men inside. But then in now looking things over and in hearing feedback from people, like you just said, like we all live in some sort of prison, real or imagined. Yeah.
And we're all a product, like you mentioned earlier, of choices we've made. And anyway, I've got some questions that we're going to dive into those things. But before we do that, I want you to now tell us, what do you do now? Let me, here's some words I saw on your website. Author, warrior, magician, and mountain of goodness is a description that someone said. Is that a good description of you, or what do you tell people? What are you doing now? Bring us up to speed, and then we're going to back up.
um sure. Right now I work as the post-release program manager for Defy Ventures, a nonprofit that helps men and women with criminal histories to transform their lives through the journey of entrepreneurship. I'm also a business owner. I created my first commercial cleaning company 6 months after I paroled. And yeah, now I have the book out, that warrior, magician, and a mountain of goodness. That was a tagline that was given to me in there when I was facilitating. After the light started to come on, I was involved with this group called the Alternatives to Violence Project. And I was one of the facilitators in it. And during the process, like on the third day before we leave for the workshop, we had these things called affirmation sheets, and people would write it and sign into it like a yearbook of each of the things. And it was written to me by one of my favorite co-facilitators from the streets. We had volunteers that came in, and she wrote, "You are a mighty warrior, a magician, and a mountain of goodness. You're one of the greatest treasures of my life." And I just love, and I kept that. I still have it, and so now I could say he's been described as that. I don't know. When I saw that, it just tugged at my heart and my soul, and I go, man, I want to aspire to be like this. Like she sees it, I don't see it. I want to be like this.
Well, it could be descriptive. It also could be prophetic. You know, it could be your tagline. It could be things you aspire to, but it sure does sound better than that description that I used when I started off the interview, you know, and like we talked about, there's so many things that feed into our identity. And, you know, we'll talk more about it, but, you know, you had gang member, you know, and other things attached to you. I think warrior, magician, and I love that mountain of goodness because from reading, you used the term darkness quite a bit. There was a lot of darkness that you had inside. And to me, my observation is, tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but today you seem to be operating out of a place of peace internally, whereas there was a lot of not peace some time ago. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, it was like a lot of chaos and turmoil and loneliness and anger and rage. Yeah, that's what I operated out of before.
Right. And so the value that I believe, and I'm going to speak directly to a listener that's going, well, I've never done anything that would put me in jail or anything like that. However, I know in our culture and society today that there are large numbers of people that have chaos and turmoil inside, and we can all learn from people that have moved closer to being at peace. I'm not sure that total peace, some people we can say that. I mean, there's always things going on, but so I admire that. And I want myself and the listener to be able to learn from that. So you gave a quote, St. Francis of Assisi, that seems pretty important to you. Why don't you share that with us before we get into some of your background and what kind of led you on your interesting journey?
Yeah, one of his favorite quotes that resonated with me when I had discovered writings by him. He wrote, "I have been all things unholy. If God can work through me, surely He can work through anyone."
Hmm. All right. So now he was a saint, so he had to been good all his life, right? He never had any issues.
No, I think, and that was like I've always been a bookworm, and inside prison, I loved reading like all different types of books, but mostly business books. But somehow along the journey around that time of the transformation for me, I stumbled upon books upon the saints, and in particular, Saint Francis of Assisi, who from what I read in some of the accounts, he came from a family of wealthy merchants. He liked to drink and carouse, and one night, him and some of his friends ended up killing somebody. But
Hmm.
from what I read, and they said, but because his family, of their influence and their wealth, Saint Francis was released the very next day. Um, but then that's when he later on, where his conversion came about, and he walked away from all of that and founded the Franciscan order, which was just, I don't know, for me it just um yeah, it hit me like, wow, I look at this now, and then it gave me just that small spark of hope in there, like my life doesn't have to be ugly like this. I don't have to die like this. So yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. And obviously, I'm going to let you. We're going to back up. All of this, I think that we're about to discuss, is in the book, so we're not going to give away all of it. But I want to kind of hit some of the high points. You talk about where you grew up. I thought it was really kind of funny you being in Utah and Catholic and all that. But let's back up and let's just spend just a couple minutes with kind of your upbringing and some things that were kind of forming in you early So why don't let's back up and do that. And we're probably going to move pretty quickly up to the time that you spent time in prison, because I think there's so many lessons at that point is when you really made some, what I call significant change from what I could read. So, but give us your background. Tell us about where you were growing up and some significant things that occurred.
Sure. I was born in Vietnam right before the fall of our country. Before the Vietnam War was over, though, we came and settled in the United States, um, Provo, Utah, of all places. My father had actually come to the United States to train with the U.S. Special Forces in the late 60s, and he attended the military academy in South Vietnam. So, which happened to be my mother's side of the family owned the apartments where the cadets stayed. So that's how they had met. When we lost the country, my mom had never seen snow before. So my father wanted to settle, in her new homeland, but take her to a place where there was snow. So it was just, I was the firstborn. Several months old. I had my mom and my father, and we settled in Provo, Utah. That's how we ended up there. Yep,
Yeah.
Roman Catholic in Mormon country.
So were y'all Roman Cat? Was there a heavy population of Roman Catholic in Vietnam? I guess I wasn't aware of that.
Yes,
I'm not
because
knowledgeable.
yeah, because of the French influence and the French colonization. So the country was predominantly either Catholic or Buddhist. And yeah, so I grew up knowing only thing of my faith is being Roman Catholic.
Yeah, and so I don't really see that there's going to be any conflict. You're going to have an easy life growing up, Vietnamese, Roman Catholic in Provo, Utah. So everything was easy for you, right?
Yeah, right after the Vietnam War. So
Right
yeah, I
after
mean,
the
for the
Vietnam
most
War.
part, yeah.
No, it was,
Unfortunately, it was during, I think, don't get me wrong, the vast majority of people in Utah are kind and caring and loving. I remember like I had some of my best memories as a kid with some of my friends in elementary, but I also experienced quite a bit of what I now know to be racism. I remember being with my uncle one day when we were just getting gas in his car as a little boy sitting in the car. I remember another car pulled up next to us and started cussing at my uncle. Said, get out of the country, gooks. You guys don't belong here." And another incident. Well, the main incident that left an indelible mark on me was with my younger brother when we were playing in the ditches. We had this game we like to play where we would collect the popsicle sticks and we make a raft out of it, and we let it float on the creeks, because in the summertime the snow would melt and the creeks get filled up with icy cold water. The summers are hot, so we could just walk down the creeks, stay ice cold for our feet. But then we put our GI Joes on top and just follow them, and they're just going down the river. But some older kids and some adults, like their uncles or their fathers or something, were at the top of the ledge, and they started throwing rocks down to us. Told us, "Get out of our country, get out of here." And there was a fence between us. So I don't know, my brother and I guess we were brave. We thought we were brave. I was what, 8, he was 6, and I those kids jumped the fence and began to chase us. So we ran up the other side. I dropped some of my GI Joes. My brother stops to pick them up, and the kids catch up to us and punch my brother. He falls down, and they just shoved dirt into his mouth. And I just stood there. I didn't do anything. I didn't know what to do, and I just only cried. Um, but I remember when we went home and let my father know what had happened, uh, he just like said, like, "Where were you? Like, how did you let this happen to your younger brother? You're supposed to protect them." And I was just ashamed, like totally ashamed. Like, I let my family down. I let my brother down. I let my dad down. So yeah, that was a pretty significant event after that, where then any time when it became close to somebody insulting my family or insulting my race, after that it became where I had to overcompensate and protect and just lash out violently at other kids.
yeah. And I know from the book that I don't know if the word is honor, I grew up in the southern United States, and there was this, in general, a quickness to fight, a quickness to battle. And, from hearing you and reading some in the book, it seems as if at times you were reluctant, but there was stages in your life that you kind of crossed over and it became the natural response.
Mhm.
And I think some things related to your father even led into that later. Why don't you kind of continue down the progression? Because I do think that those are some of the choices that you talk about quite a bit. So keep going and talk more, because I know your father was significant. Fathers are significant to us. Really,
Yeah,
fathers are a reflection of our relationship with our heavenly Father in many ways. And in many times that's good. Sometimes it's challenging. So tell us about your father and that relationship and the impact that that had.
sure. My father, when we came to the United States, his first job was as a custodian at a local supermarket. I think he worked the graveyard shift, and with his first paycheck, I know my mom said that what he bought was a bike, so he could get to work faster, and that's how we started on in our new country. But he ended up working at the coal mines in the city of Price, a nearby city of Price. But then he created the Vietnamese Refugee Association, where he wanted to help um, refugees from our country get adjusted to their new homeland. So my father on the weekends would drive to neighboring states like Wyoming or Colorado, or just drive further down into other places, and he'd help Vietnamese families fill out the paperwork for the DMV or Social Security or whatever documents they needed. And as a young boy, I got to go on these car rides with him because I was the oldest, and it would just be me and my dad all Saturday. And I looked at it as this is my special time to be with my dad. I could ask him all these questions, get my life questions answered, and yeah. But I did not understand. I didn't understand the significance of what he's trying to tell me. Like when I said, "Well, how much do you get paid for this job?" And he goes, "I don't get paid. I do this for free." And it didn't make sense to me. Like, why? Why would you do this for free? As a little boy, I didn't grasp it at the time. Uh, he was also, because of his work with the Vietnamese Refugee Association, though he became pretty popular with the local congressmen and senators. They started to come to our house quite a bit, and because my father had went to the military academy in Vietnam, uh, these government officials told me, Quan, when you grow up, um, we want you to be just like your father. You're going to be the first Vietnamese American to go to West Point. So, what little boy doesn't want to be like their father? So I said, okay. I remember as even a little kid, I opened books on West Point, see like the gray uniforms, and I imagine myself, yeah, when I'm older, I'm going to be in that uniform. I'm going to be just like my father. Um, but then he gets diagnosed with leukemia when I think I was about 8 years old, 9 years old. Right there, his condition gets worse, and we decide to move to California because his family member, his extended family, lived out here in California. So we moved out to Southern California. This is the first time that I go to school with kids that are not predominantly white. Now there's African Americans, Hispanics, other Vietnamese, but even with the other Vietnamese, I did not feel like I fit in because the kids said I was whitewashed because I couldn't speak Vietnamese well. A lot of them couldn't speak English well, and I just remember feeling like there's something wrong with me, like where I don't fit in with people, and people, I'm not really recognized or accepted. It just there's just something wrong with me.
Do you think that the aspect of not fitting in, I know there's other variables that led to what ended up, the choices you made, but how significant is not fitting in?
Uh, it's depending on what age. I think because of not feeling like I fit in, and then continuing to feed that narrative later on, and looking for confirmation in other experiences, and then tying that into part of my narrative is where it
Mhm.
became a lot more significant than it needed to be.
Right. Yeah. And because there are times that we begin, I don't know if it's attracting things, you know what I mean? It's almost like in reading your story, it's almost like I know you were highlighting the things that led to what happened. It's almost like, okay, the path you were going down, that was almost the only way it could end up unless something drastic changed. Now, there was another significant thing. Tell us about your father, because I know the things you discuss around his passing and all seemed to be also a pretty impactful time for you. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So his condition started to get worse, and we were raised Roman Catholic. They put us in catechism classes out here, and as our the day of my first communion started coming up, this is when I was 13. I My mom, one of the few times I ever saw my mom break down and cry, or just cry in general. She was one day that we pulled up to the hospital to visit my father, and she just said, "The doctors said your father doesn't have much longer to live," and she just started crying, and I felt so helpless. I didn't know what to do. Could only put my hand on her shoulder. We didn't know how to express any type of love or anything to each other like that. And it just took me by surprise to ever see someone that I'd never seen cry before cry. Um, but I told myself, you know what? Our first communion is coming up. When I eat that bread, I am going to pray to God to let my father live, and He'll grant this because this is our first communion. So our first communion that year also fell on Mother's Day, and I woke up that Sunday morning, and my younger sister tells me that my father had died the night before. So in my mind, I just thought, crap, God killed my dad because he didn't want to grant my prayer. There must be something really wrong with me. Like, why would God not grant this prayer?
Mm,
So, yeah,
right. And how old were you then? What, 13?
13.
Okay. So the items that began occurring after that, we won't go into all the details here, but you spent some time in the juvenile system. Shortly after that, there was an event that put you in the prison system. Have you put any thought into, because one of the words I wrote down, I'm taking notes here as you're talking, is the word disappointments.
Hmm.
And many times in life, we feel that disappointments begin piling up. We have expectations because, to give people the rest of the story, you did not get to go to West Point as was one of the dreams. And obviously you prayed for a healing that did not occur. At least I mean, he actually is fully healed now, but in the natural world, he's not here. He's not healed. My guess is there's other disappointments with fitting in and all that. Have you put any thought, Quan, into, is there anything that you could have done that could have reversed your course from 13 to, I think 2021 is when, the events that put you in federal prison occurred. But is there anything that could have gone on? I mean, is there any way to look back and go, wow, if I had done blank?
Yeah, I mean, like any time along that way, you know, after my father passed away, when I look back now, like the whole family was devastated. None of us ever talked about it again. My mom never once asked, "How are you feeling?" Um, Me, my brother, and my sister. Like I only looked at it from my perspective. My brother and sister were younger than me. They were most likely way more devastated. You know, like in reading this book now, like my sister recently calls me. She read the book and just said, "I didn't know Dad did all that stuff. Like, I don't remember the Vietnamese Refugee Association. I say, you don't? And she's like, no. She goes, the dad I knew was always in and out of the hospital. So for me, I was like, oh my God, how heartbreaking is this? She only knew my dad like that. She didn't get to see the um, the amazing impact that he did. So that broke my heart just to hear, damn, my own younger sister never knew this. Um, but it's just after that, and after choosing to go with the wrong friends and hanging out and then going into the street life, and then continuing to choose after my first arrest to not own any of it, blaming the world and God and the American justice system, and then getting out and choosing to immerse myself deeper into the gang life, and then getting arrested and choosing to not take ownership in any of that. So it's continued series of wrong choices that at any time, if I just chosen, okay, you know what, I want to choose to go a different path, or I want to choose to have a better way of showing up or living in this world. But it's just, I didn't want to face that part of me that felt, you know what, maybe there is something really wrong with me, or maybe I really don't fit in this world. So I'll just choose the easy way to go about this.
Yeah, what does the gang life? I mean, listen, I'm white dude that grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta, and I don't have a clue about any of this. So, and I'm guessing some of the listeners are the same. But when someone says they want to have that sense of belonging, and that the gangs actually feed and fuel that, tell us tell us why. Give us a little bit of a glimpse into that culture so that people that don't have a clue can understand it, because we look at it and go, man, y'all are just getting in trouble, man, come on, why would you do that? There's more to it than that. Help educate us on what's going on there.
Yeah, the gang fulfilled that part of me that felt like I fit in, that I could be recognized, that I'm liked. It's a shared bond, like a brotherhood. You know, it wasn't until later when I'm doing my life sentence and I look back and I go, okay, what if things had gone right in my life? What if I had went to West Point? And then I contrasted that with my life in the gang. Like, it probably like being a soldier or being in the military would have still resolved that sense of fulfillment and
Hmm.
fitting in. And I well, don't get me wrong, I'm not in any way saying the military and gangs are the same, but I'm just saying where that sense of fitting in and where that sense of fulfillment and recognition, um, that's where I could see some parallels in it.
Yeah, no, I get it, because I think human nature is they want to belong. I mean, part
Mhm.
of the divisiveness that we see in our world and our country today is that people get extremely dogmatic about being a part of whatever they are: conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat.
Mhm.
We're business owners, white, black, wealthy, poor. I mean, all those things is part of what feeds it. You just found that in the life of being in a gang. And you know i i, I don't think that one has to be that. We know where that leads. So give us a real quick, let's go through that part real quickly, up to the point of the event that led you into federal prison, because you almost, it seemed to me from reading it, you couldn't quite break away from it, even though you were, part of you was trying, but you couldn't quite do that. Tell me if I'm right or wrong, and give us a little
Mhm.
background there.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the best way to describe it, because I think also humans inherently want to, like you say, fit in, but then are inherently good. They want to do something good, and I couldn't find where that good was. Like, I just felt, this is what I'm comfortable with. This is part of my family now. This is how I have to protect my brothers, and this is how I have to protect my name and our reputation in the gang. Um, but yet there's another part of me that, I want to still fulfill uh, that the hopes and the obligations that I can somehow have my father look down on me and say that I've done something with my life. Um, so there was always that constant conflict and struggle inside where I want to live up to my mother's expectations, but continuing to realize, I let her down. I didn't make it to West Point. I'm not. I've already. I'm already a convicted felon. I'm not doing well, or I'm not. I'm not successful, and I can't even take care of my mom. And so all of those I can't sit with. So it's easier and more comfortable and easy for me to just settle and do what I want in a gang, and I could find my recognition there by inflicting violence and getting involved with whatever we were up to.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I was reading, there's a book that I read way back in high school. I don't know if you ever read it. It's an old, kind of a classic novel, but it's The Lord of the Flies.
Hmm.
And it basically, it describes, and it doesn't look very kindly on humans. It's a group of young boys that get stranded on an island, and they break up into two groups, gangs, groups, whatever. One
Hmm.
group tries to establish law and order and, whatever. And the other group kind of goes wild. And I don't know why, but as I was reading your background story, I kept thinking of Lord of the Flies, in that the path you were going. Now, I knew where you were going. I knew where this path was leading because of the subtitle of the book, so it wasn't like a novel, but it was fascinating to me just to see how that unfolded. Now, a couple things though that are really interesting. There is an incredible level of leadership that can be seen in that culture also, and also entrepreneurship and business mindedness and protecting people that you're responsible for. And now obviously it crosses a line, but maybe can you speak to a little bit of that in that culture? And really we're going to, I think, look at that when we talk about being in prison also, but just maybe leadership, mindedness within the gang culture, because boy, they are creative.
Yeah, sure. I could. I mean, like even like the.
We're not trying to glorify it either. We're just
Yeah, yeah.
we're
No, it's
learning
just
from it. Yeah, yeah.
because I think there are some, transferable traits or skills in it. When I was prosecuted and they tried me for the death penalty, um, they had said I took a leadership role, which I did, and I orchestrated and organized like how we were following the victims and then how we would ambush them on the freeway. And it was over a span of like 20, 25 miles. Um, Inside the gang, there's the structures of this is how this is supposed to be run. This has to be done this way, and there are rules like even in the prison culture. Uh, these are rules you have to abide by. Like almost a sense of like honor or laws that we've created, and you have to abide by these laws. But it's just the flip side of it is if you break those laws, and then there's consequences that usually end up with violence. um, let's say even in prison, when I was at my worst in prison, and in prison they say this thing about hustling, and everybody likes to get their hustle on. So in particular, like by the time I had got to Solano, I was involved. We call it like the gambling rackets, where we I created a ticket and people would bet on the football tickets, but it's run like a parlay ticket. But then I set up the odds to, particularly be in my favor, the house's favor. But we basically became like the house and took all bets across the whole yard, and then it ended up spanning into several yards. Setting up what is it, a runner per building to get the bets, and then that laid the infrastructure to lay out the drug trade, the tobacco trade, the cell phones, and so it just all became pretty elaborate on just what's on the surface seems, oh, this is just people betting on some football games, but it was a lot deeper than that.
Within the walls of a prison with
Yeah.
guards, and all of that was not allowed, correct?
None of it was allowed.
Right. So there does, gosh, there is some creativity there. It's a shame. I mean, I work with a lot of business people, Quan, and boy, I would love to see some of that energy from some of the people I work with to be able to, just come up with that creativity. And also, and again, I want to make sure we're not glorifying any of, gang, prison, anything like that. But anyway, there's lessons to be learned there. There is something, as I was reading along either late last night or early this morning when I was trying to get through the book, that jumped out at me. And I can't remember exactly how you worded it. I know I highlighted it. I don't have it open in front of me. But there was a period of time when you were incarcerated, and tell us when you went in and when you came out. And I'm going to leave a lot of the details for people to read in the book, but give us just the real general how long you were there. And
For this last case, I was in there for 16 years. I went in 1999 and I paroled in November of 2015.
okay. And what areas did you spend? It's mostly California, correct?
It was all California. These were state prisons. I know you said federal prison, but they were all state
Okay.
prisons.
Okay.
Um, so it's all California. I started at Pelican Bay, then I went to Donovan, and then I was housed at Soledad, and then I ultimately paroled from Solano.
Okay. And so you spent that time there. At some point, not only when this was, there was a word that you mentioned that started rearing up in you, and that word was hope. And what I want to ask you to, number one, talk about that, maybe the time that you were in prison that you started feeling hope. But I also want to back up and go back to maybe the time from you were 13 on. Do you recall many times in your life where there was hope? I mean, was there hope when you were in and around the gang culture? I know you actually had a business, a corporate job for a period of time, and were trying to do some college and things. Talk about maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being dismal, 10 being off the charts. Obviously, at the age of 13, on Mother's Day, your communion, your father dies. I'm guessing your level of hope would have been probably negative,
Mm-hmm.
and probably, you go behind bars pretty low, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
But give me just a couple of touchstones along the way at where your level of hope might have been, all the way up to that point where you said in the book that all of a sudden you had some hope that maybe you weren't going to serve a life sentence.
Yeah. So hope after my father passed away, yeah, very dismal. Probably just like a little candle that's about to flutter out throughout my whole life. Um, then in 1998, right before I committed the murder, I was working at the Gallup organization. Um, I became their 1998 Interviewer of the Year, and they asked me to take a management position. So when I took that management position, I think my hope level probably had went to about 7 or 8, like the most hope I had ever felt my whole life. Like finally something's gonna go right for once in my life. Um, their interviews are done, just before the fame of their strengths finder studies. So they were already doing these strengths finders with us in the interviews, but it was not published. And a couple months after I took the interview, they came back and they said, Quan, we are sorry, but you are not a fit. And those are the exact words they use, but that's just how Gallup talk. But for me, it just reminded me I am not a fit. Like something's wrong with me.
Now, you had
And
been
that
in the
hope went down too.
juvenile system before that. Do you think that
Yes.
played into it?
So it's funny you bring that up because I never once thought of that until actually when I was found suitable at the parole board in 2015. The board parole commissioner told me that. She said, had it ever once crossed in your mind that you weren't turned down because you weren't a fit, but because of your conviction by that time? And I sat there and it just blew me away. Like, oh my God, after all these years, after all this work, that never once crossed my mind. I only thought of the worst possible thing. Yeah. So I remember that day when I was found suitable and she asked me that. This was after I was already found suitable. Like we're getting up and she's like, let me ask you something. Did it ever cross your mind? And I said, no,
So
I
was
never
there,
thought
I
that.
mean, so there's a theme here of disappointments is kind
Hmm.
of what I'm seeing here. Disappointments with obviously your father, disappointments with not going to West Point, disappointments with this job, and there may be others, but was there a boiling over? Was there, I mean, what was going on as those sort of piled up? Because shortly after this situation with Gallup, you committed murder. I mean,
Yeah.
you were still in gangs while you were working there, correct?
Hmm. Well, when I got turned down, it was just a pattern that I had already incorporated in my life where things are disappointing me. Um, Arguments with my girlfriend or whatever it is, like things that I don't know how to resolve, I would use the gang as an outlet to vent. So if instead of, a normal healthy human being can just call someone and just say, or express to my girlfriend or express to a friend, yeah, this is what happened. Me and my girlfriend got in a fight or whatever. I'm just feeling a little upset and frustrated, and this is what happened. Me, instead, by that time, I just shoved it into the dark corner with all the other feelings that I always hid, and call up one of my friends from the gang and, oh, let's go out to the pool hall, knowing damn well there's all this going on inside of me and looking for someone to take it out on. Oh, that guy is looking at me wrong, and then go and confront him, and we end up in a fight. All because I want to be able to vent and then feed this excitement, because I think as long as there's excitement, it takes or numbs out everything else up that's going on in my life. Um, but being turned down at Gallup for me at the time, and I look back now, man, how could I have just been so like weak and without any type of grit to, man, it's just a job interview to turn down, like. But yeah, for me, I placed all my hope in it, whatever hope I had into that. Things didn't go right, and I knew, like, okay, I'm a failure in this part of my life, thinking that's a failure, but I knew where I could excel and be recognized and regain some of that, sense of power that I lost, and that's in the gang. So we went to that club in Hollywood. Found out some of my friends got in a fight, and suddenly I take control. Hey, where are they at? Let's go here. And I wasn't even involved in the fight, but I wanted, and the pro boy kept asking me, why were you the one to want to pull this trigger? And I said, it's because of being turned down. I didn't know how to deal with it. I wanted to get rid of all of this, whatever's going on, out on somebody. And at the same time, gain recognition and continue, I guess, to build on my reputation with the gang. Um,
When I was not going to ask this, so there's a question that just popped into my mind. When, because, and again, we're not going to go through all the details so people can get the book, but when you fired into the car with the intent to harm, kill, murder, whatever the intent was, and you may or may not known at that time that you had killed someone, but there was some time in the very near future after that where you found out that you had killed someone. Do you recall any thoughts, remorse? Oh no, were you deadened to that on the inside? Was it just part of what you had to do? Was it your code of honor? Do you recall that at all? Because I'm actually trying to think through what mentally your soul, what was going on when you found out you
yeah,
had taken someone's life.
um, I'm not sure exactly. I think like by that time, my sense of like humanity was so much far gone out of me. I don't like when I'm even think about it. I think it was just so cold and calloused. It was more okay. Somebody's died. There was an ugly, prideful part of me. It was like, yes, I get another stripe. Like this is what I've accomplished. I did something, great. And then the other part is okay, now I have to make sure I'm not caught. Let me outsmart the police. Let me make sure this doesn't happen and start trying to figure out what are the next steps. How do I go about this? So yeah, I mean, I'm ashamed to say, like, I did not feel any sense of, or begin to feel any sense of remorse, probably 10, 12 years into the prison sentence.
Wow. And it seems like, going back to the hope that we were talking about earlier, that the remorse began coming at about the time that the hope entered in. Is that the time
Yeah.
frames? Did I read those right? So
Mhm.
now let's jump back to hope. We're bouncing a little bit, but it's all coming together here. So 12 years into your prison sentence, all of a sudden some things begin to click. You're not running the gambling ring and bringing cell phones in to the prison anymore. Maybe you were, but you were starting to get out of that. And all of a sudden some things started happening. And to me, the observation is you started taking your eyes off yourself because you began helping and looking at other people. Is that correct? Did I put those pieces together from
Yeah,
reading it?
that's probably the best way to describe it. I mean, yeah, there was a whole bunch of things that led up to, creating this perfect storm in my mind and in my soul of, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. And then suddenly I get this small spark of hope. But yeah, but then when that came in, it was more like 10 out of 10. This is hope. Like, and it wasn't even hope of going home. It was hope of I am alive, and hope of I am okay with being here. I am where I'm supposed to be because this is how I can can be in this world and make an impact right now.
Right, because
That's
I think there was someone named Donnie that I use the word discipled. He almost like coached or discipled you on some things. We won't
yeah.
get into those details, but you then started turning around and doing similar things to others. Tell me about
Mhm.
that and what that did for you and what it did for your soul as you started focusing on that.
Yeah, I just noticed, like, when I help others, like every time I started to feel like down or depressed, I noticed if I get outside of myself and I do something for others, it made me feel good inside for once. It made me feel like I
Mm.
I I'm doing this for others, and it feels good. Um, I After Donnie kind of began me on my trajectory of change. Um, and I've always been a bookworm, so I start soaking up these books on personal responsibility and choice and mindfulness. And I saw, like, this is how I want to show up in the world. This is how I want to lead my life. Um, I started sharing these same concepts with others around me, uh, and going through it on a context of I'm helping them to find their freedom. A lot of the men scoffed at me at first because they said, who's this guy? He's never gone to the parole board. How can he help another man to go home?" But then one of my first friends that I helped go in front of the parole board that went home after that, suddenly men wanted to sit down, like, what does he have? Um, and for me, I knew, their motivations were to go have me help them, help coach them to go to the pro board and to be found suitable. My motivation was I have found this amazing secret freedom inside already. And I want to get them to a place of understanding their choices in life, and understanding what personal responsibility is and how to make amends before we ever even go home, and get cultivate that mindset to continue to build and change the culture of this whole prison yard that we're on. So it just slowly seeing, like, little seeds that I'm planting and seeing where they're starting to sprout up, and then seeing what they're learning and they're sharing with others. And I could just see, like, the whole fabric of prison life for me just changed while I was in there.
Were you reading? I'd actually made a note about asking you about your reading habit also. Were you
Yeah,
reading voraciously as it sounds like you were during certain times? Were
yeah.
you doing that early on in your sentence? Did it pick up steam later? what was your reading habit maybe for the 15 years, 15 whatever years you were incarcerated?
Yeah, I have always been a bookworm. Like every prison I was at, I was known to read like 3 or 4 books simultaneously. But my reading habits in the beginning more with books on like on true crime drama and mafia books and all these things and filling my mind or like then later on like I love fantasy, so I've always read fantasy and go with them, and then I'll read some of the classics of of just literature, but it was mostly novels a lot of times. But then later on, sometimes there was business books here and there. It was at Solano that I was really into a lot of business books. I remember following the Wall Street Journal's bestsellers list and look at that and kind of pick about certain books, and I get those books sent in, or I ask for it at the library. If they don't have it, I get somebody outside to send it in for me. And those books would feed me. But then, yeah, when the light came on, though, it was all, personal development or business. And then I'm understanding about, let's say, when I started to see a therapist regarding my father's death, I get engrossed about books on grief and loss. When I began facilitating groups on victims awareness and 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 those concepts, I was very engrossed on books of restorative justice movement and how do they contribute to um, things. So yeah, I just poured myself into it and I just started learning. But not only learning, and then I looked at this as, you know what, this is a perfect opportunity to apply this lesson in this book to my life out here. And that's how I just approached each day, like every morning waking up, like what does God have in store for me today to learn about myself? Or how can I help somebody along their journey? Or how can I run into somebody to teach me something else about myself? And so every day was just became a new day for me to become better. And that's just how I looked at it.
Yeah, that was good. I wanted to ask at some point, you mentioned that you picked up the Bible, but what was your spiritual mindset? We already mentioned earlier that you were disappointed at the age of 13 when
Hmm.
you lifted up a prayer to the Lord, and it seemed as if He did not answer that prayer or ignored you or didn't care for you or whatever. So at some point, there was a spiritual journey, and we're all going through a spiritual journey anyway, but
Hmm.
was that did that coincide with the hope and other things going on? Was there other things happening? I mean, see, also
Hmm.
believe you were like tilling the soil with the reading, because one can't be reading, especially quality type things, and not have your soul just prepared for something new. So talk a little bit about your spiritual growth, and then I have a few
Yeah.
more questions before we begin wrapping up.
Um, yeah, it was, yeah, in the book I detailed just one day I just picked up a Bible in a whole pile of discarded books, and like, whoa, I looked and then I started reading and I saw these themes that were so in alignment with suddenly how I saw the world and how I wanted to live. And I don't know, suddenly I went back and started reading more, and then I looked back even on my faith and read into the catechism of the church, and then just reading about uh, uh, other books that were written by other Christians. Um, yeah, I during that time it just became for me, this is our faith, and we're saying there's one God, and this is the faith, and you know understanding God did not kill my father and God didn't do this, and the I even read during that time, Buddhist books, uh, uh books by the the Bhagavad Gita, and like there's just all these different spiritual books, and I saw, man, like all of these religions or all of these spiritual practices talk about just treating, like inherently treating other humans right, and there's a goodness in all of us, and that's what we're trying to look for. And suddenly, for me, I just go, okay, I yeah, this is my own spiritual journey here that I'm going through. Especially when they talk about the death of the old self to come up with the new, and those, so all these things tied in together. Like, this is what I think I am experiencing at this time.
Yeah, that's good. One of the foundations of Christianity is that we are forgiven of our sins.
Hmm.
And we know in going back to Mosaic law that thou shalt not kill is one of the basics of the law. And I know that there are probably still many in the church that would judge what you did. Do you believe that you have been forgiven of that sin of thou shalt not murder?
Yes. Um, I held on to that for a long time. It was this label I held on to. I'm a murderer. I'm a murderer. Um, and it wasn't until I had this one workshop where we had to write on 10 slips of paper, like describe yourself. Who are you? And I wrote, I'm a brother. I'm a son. And one of the things I wrote down it was murderer. And they did the exercise where they asked me to crumble up that word and look at it. And I remember reading murder to ask crumble up and drop it and imagine it not being a part of my identity. How does it feel? And when I did that is when I realized, like, why am I holding on to this part? This is still a form of arrogance to say that, especially if I'm saying this is what my faith says, that we can be forgiven for everything. Then who am I to say I've done the most terrible thing? And if God says I can be forgiven, so um, that's when I first realized, why do I need to hold on to this label? And I realized I don't. Um, I can describe myself in those harsh terms, and then I could feel sorry for myself forever and just say, I'm a murderer, I can't be redeemed. Then what good does that do to the world? Or I could just say, this is where I can begin to forgive myself. I am a human being. I did commit murder, yes, but I am not a murderer and I can be forgiven. And it wasn't like, okay, right then I realized I'm forgiven. No, it was more like, okay, this is what I believe now. Then suddenly, when the next time I judge myself harshly, or even worse, when I'm judging somebody else, that's when then it makes me remind myself, wait, step back. Quan, you've done the worst of all things. You cannot judge that man. Or you know what? Here you go again, Quan, like judging yourself and going against the principles of our faith. So it's just constant refinement of it.
Yeah, that is so good. Which also means, and listen, in the world we're in, it is definitely possible that others will judge us and
Hmm.
people will judge you, but we're commanded to judge not, lest we be judged. And so oh, that's so powerful. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to, number one, to ask that question, especially in kind of the direct way that I did. I hope it, I think people would know kind of what my heart is, because I wanted to hear you speak it in that way, because it was powerful the way you said it. And there's much that we can learn from it. You mentioned you studied some of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the 5 stages of death, and it kind of it revealed some things about personal responsibility. And you were able to, everything I saw you do in the book, you were in some form of a leadership or very much a role that gave you the ability to observe a lot of things. And you observed some things related to those stages of death and personal responsibility that really unlocked a lot of keys for you. And it sounds as if you're now helping some others that are in prison do the same thing. Could you talk through that some? Because I also believe those are principles that apply outside of prison walls, about taking personal responsibility. And I may ask a follow-up, but talk a little bit about that, because I think there's a lot of wisdom there.
Yeah, for me, it became, and it always became the backdrop of reading a prisoner's parole hearing transcripts. What they say in there was never the same as exactly when a person described to me, like, oh yeah, I went to the parole board, I got denied, and it was because of this, this, and this, and this. And it was always this sense, especially later on when I became very mindful of listening and just hearing the words people were using. It gave me a very intimate glimpse of how they saw themselves in the world, if they saw themselves from a place of, I'm a victim, I'm a continuous victim. And sometimes it's very subtle, they don't even realize it. Um, or, the simple, like a simple example would be, in prison, two guys argue, end up getting a fight or whatever, and it's because he made me mad. Or, and then the simple one just could just be, you know what, I feel upset by what he said. Like, I'm owning this for my side of the fence, my feelings, instead of blaming the other person. So I think instead of saying, he makes me mad, or Tim, you make me mad, then I'm giving all that power to you or to Tim. But if I can understand what Tim said scares me or hurts me, then I can acknowledge that, sit down and let it go. And then I own my feelings, I own my choices, I own the way I speak to people. And now I could own how I show up in the world, whether that's, moving through it with, I choose my way each day today. And it was for me a sense of such liberating purpose, because I can just choose my way through every conflict that's coming on, whether it's my mind saying crazy things, my thoughts, or other people saying things. I could still choose to find my way through all of this. And that's the only way I could describe it for myself.
Yeah, that's good. So my follow-up question is, how does that apply to people, business people, entrepreneurs? Maybe even one of the things I noticed you discuss quite a bit, the racial challenges and struggles in prisons. But at the time we're recording this, we're seeing that outside of the prison
Mhm.
walls too. And in many ways that I think it can spill into it, but to give us some lessons that those outside the prison walls might learn from what you just talked about with the personal responsibility. Maybe you've seen them, maybe not, but just they apply to everything, I think.
Yeah, I mean, let's just say, okay, a simple example that I see out here, let's say I'm in the Costco line and someone just cuts in front of me. I can choose right then, like, to tell myself, hey, this guy cut in front, he's rude, he's this, he's that. Or I could just choose to say, you know what, or just choose to take a step back. Yes, this person bothered me. And yes, this is, I'm frustrated. But then I think once I can say that, then it also makes me easier to say, you know what, there must be something going on in that person's life for them to be this way. And it just, I don't know. Or one with, um, I, let's say I get upset with my mom for something, and owning that and just telling her, like, okay, this is what happened, and this is how I feel, and this is what I would just like, instead of just screaming and then blaming her. Oh, you always do this. Um,
How about in
and
your
or
business?
when I do
How
that, yeah.
about in your
Or, oh yeah,
business, your company you've started?
yeah, I mean, I I'm human. Like, sometimes I've messed up on some of the payroll checks for the guys. So, I can, and they're texting me, and I'm in the middle of a meeting, and they're saying something. I was like, oh my goodness, I forgot. So it's just own it right there. You know what? I'm absolutely sorry. I forgot. And don't make
Yeah.
any excuses about it. Instead of, yeah, I was busy, da, 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 and I just think it takes away, for me. There's just more power in just saying, I'm sorry, I forgot, or just get right to it. This is what happened. I apologize. I will correct it.
That's excellent. And there's probably so many more there that we could discuss, but I love that taking responsibility. It seems as if that's getting in short supply in our culture. The more advanced we get, the more
Yeah.
knowledge and access we have to internet, everything is like more and more victim mindset is what is the words that I use. So thank you for sharing that. I mean, you we won't go into it here, but it was incredible how you were released. I mean, you had a life sentence and you're not in prison now. So I'm going to leave
Yeah.
that for people to get the book. But what are maybe another lesson or two that you have taken from your experience in prison and while you were in that setting? A few lessons that you can share with the audience.
Uh, Let me see. One would probably be like, even if the world says it cannot be done, just don't automatically buy into it. Whether that was in prison, I experienced it, and whether out here, I've also experienced like people in prison said, "Oh, you can't do that. It's always been this way." And then even when I started to come home, that's not how things are done out here. You don't know. You've
Mhm.
never, you haven't been home long enough. But then yet, I just go with like, this feels right in my gut. This is what my intuition tells me.
Yeah, yeah, that's very good. So, all right, tell us. We dwelled a lot on prison and things like that. That's part of your story, and you're probably going to get that a lot from people because it's unique with a lot of people that want to talk to you and different. But tell us a little bit more about Defy Ventures and what you're doing with them. And then I'm going to ask you one last question before we finish up here and go from there. So tell us what you're doing now. I know you've got your own company, but you also are doing some cool things with Defy Ventures.
Yeah, so Defy Ventures, like I mentioned earlier, is a nonprofit that helps men and women transform their lives through entrepreneurship. I was a participant in the program. I came home, stayed involved with them, and that's how I created my company. But when they expanded out here to Southern California, they asked if I would want to jump on board to help build out what the post-release program is. And that was about 2.5 years ago. I jumped on with them. Now I get to help the men and women that are coming home in their reentry journey. Um, you know, get connected to employment partnerships, get referred for resources, get um, welcome to our community of supporters and other men and women that have come home, plus other entrepreneurs. And we've just built a community to support and um, to make them feel like, okay, this is a group of people that's ready and willing to help support you on this.
That's awesome. I do love even in the times that you were not necessarily making the choices that you would say were leading to good things, you really do rise to a role of leadership or support, it seems to me, in just about everything you do. And that's impressive to me. So thank you for doing that. One other thing that I wanted to ask about from the book, you wrote out you had in there a personal mission statement, which to me, I just want to tell people that it's worth the getting the book just to read through it. But give me just a glimpse, give the audience just a glimpse of where that came from, how it came to be. You don't have to give it to people;
Sure.
they need to get the book to see that. But how did it come to be? I mean, if you want to give a few sentences or two, that's cool. But
Yeah. Well, it became for me, I call it your inner jewel. And it was became a mantra that I wanted, like, first, like I read a book and I go, what do I like about this? Or little lessons from certain books I read. And I just wrote it down and I just in my own words, or I paraphrase whatever. But then it was one day because I had a whole list of different things, like some things like practice mindfulness, listen twice as much as you speak, effectiveness with people, efficiency with everything else, laugh at life. Like there are all these things that I wanted to make as the parameters for my life and how I wanted to lead each day. But then I don't know, as I wrote, then I go, one, let me see what this looks like. And I just kind of shaped it into a form of a jewel. So then that's when I called it your inner jewel. And I printed it, I taped it to my bunk, I made an extra copy, put it in my my book bag just to carry. And it just for me every day, this is how I want to set my intention each day, and this is how I want to live. Like these are the parameters in which I want to live by. And that was
wow,
like my became like my inner compass, I guess, or my North Star, or however you want to call it. Yeah.
yeah, that's excellent. Again, worth getting the book just for that. There's a lot of other great stuff in there, but definitely for that. Quan, how can people connect with you and also tell us where to get the book? So let everybody know. I know it's released now, and by the time people listen to the podcast, it'll be out for a little while, but where can they find the book and connect with you?
Sure, they can get the book on Amazon. They can get it on Audible, Barnes and Noble. They can get it right off our my website. People can find me at all the social media. It's at Quan X Huynh. So QUANX and then HUYNH. That's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and my website is the same thing, www.quanxhuynh.com. But then if it's that last name is hard to spell, you could also just type in sparrowintherazorwire.com and it will point you straight to the website, because I
All right.
figured it's not that easy to spell. So
Excellent. What's next for you, Quan? What's next? Either short term, long term? What's coming up?
uh well, short term is we're actually in the process of my cleaning company. We're on the process of training, interviewing, training, and onboarding like 24, 28 new full-time employees nationally. So I'm okay. Now, not if when I pull this off, that's probably next. But next is also just seeing where this book launch goes. But I think long term, I'm not sure. Like I think I just see what the universe or what God opens up for me next. Like how can I still look for a way to serve and help and make an impact? So
Yeah, that's good. The title of this podcast is Seek, Go, Create. Those three words. Which one of those words resonates with you, maybe jumps out, and why? Last question.
create. Because I think we can continue to create a new destiny each day. Like, yeah, I might slip today. Tomorrow, I could create a new way by choosing something else. So, create
Wow.
would have to be it.
Juan, I have enjoyed this probably more than I thought I would. I knew we were going to have fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. If you have listened to this and you want to continue connecting with us in our community, go to seekgocreate.com. That's seekgocreate.com. Simple just to give us your email address and you'll be eligible for giveaways and you'll never miss any of our content or episodes. You can also find us and communicate on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. We are Seek, Go, Create at all of those. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to connecting with you on the Seek, Go, Create podcast in the near future.